Trigger warning, in this episode, we will be talking about suicide and self-harm. The purpose of this podcast is to provide a brief overview of the risk factors for suicide, the warning signs, and the actions a person can take to intervene. We will also be talking about the resources available to learn more about this topic, since this podcast is not a substitute for in-depth and formal training. If you feel triggered at any time, please remember that the suicide hotline is 988, and the URI Telus app, which can be found on the Counseling Services website, is available at all times to talk with someone who can help. Welcome to Roadie Wellness, where we explore all things health and self-care. Whether you're seeking mental clarity, physical fitness, or insight from students like you, we've got you covered. Welcome back to the Roadie Wellness podcast. Today we are continuing our conversation with Jessica Greene about QPR and suicide prevention. Today we're going to go over the Persuade part of the QPR framework, and we are also going to talk about the risk factors that can increase a person's risk of suicide, as well as factors that can decrease a person's risk of suicide. So to start us off, what are some risk factors that can increase someone's risk of suicide?
Yeah, we know that in college, suicide is the second leading cause of death for college students. And so this is a time of transition, right? We have freshmen coming to a new campus, maybe a new state, living on their own for the first time, having to navigate academics and social life and getting food and exercise and all that stuff. And so it can be really challenging, and especially if someone is coming in with a history of mental health issues, or if anything happens, while they're here. And so there are some factors that can increase someone's risk for suicide. One of them is drug and alcohol use. And so we know that alcohol is a depressant. And so if someone is already struggling with mental health and they're using, alcohol, and they're already not in a great mind frame, that alcohol exasperates those feelings that they're having and can increase their thoughts of suicide or their wanting to commit suicide. And we know that sometimes people use alcohol as a coping technique to deal with their pain or their struggles. And so I always tell people, use the HALT acronym, HALT. So if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, HALT. You should not use substances that will alter your mood, like alcohol or drugs, because you might end up doing things you might regret later on, or might do things that might harm yourself. So we find that with people who are struggling with mental health already, that drug and alcohol use can exacerbate things, and then sometimes that could be a coping technique. We also know that people with a history of depression or mental health disorder who are not seeking support, maybe they should be going to counseling and they're not, or they should be on a medication to help them and they're not, they have an increased risk of suicide. We have millions of people in our country and thousands of students who do have mental health disorders or do suffer from depression, and they are not at risk because they are getting the resources that they need. It's the people that aren't connecting with those resources that we definitely want to get connected. Speaking of connection, sometimes on a college campus, our students have limited social support. Maybe they don't have a strong friend group, or they're not connected with faculty or others on campus, and they might spend a lot of time, lonely or isolated in their room. And so not having someone or people that they can rely on or go to can feel very lonely and isolating, and that limited social support can increase thoughts of suicide. If someone has also experienced past trauma or lost a loved one due to suicide, that increases someone's risk, as well as self-harming behaviors. So we know that self-harming behaviors like cutting, hair pulling, burning, those are not a form of suicide, but what they can do is they can desensitize a person. So if they're using those self-harming behaviors as a coping technique, and then they do struggle with thoughts of suicide, that can increase their risk as well. And sometimes things that can be very traumatic, like, something happens to them. Maybe they're diagnosed with a terminal illness when they get to campus, or they were assaulted, or something very embarrassing happens, or they end up having academic troubles. There's a lot of different things that can happen while one's in college. It doesn't mean that all those things can increase risk of suicide, but it means that someone's already vulnerable and they're already struggling, and then you compile that, add that to that person's baggage, those can be the extra things that can cause someone to want to consider suicide.
What are some factors that can help decrease suicide ideation?
So there are things that we can do individually and then also as a community to help protect against suicide. As a community, we can look out for one another, right? We are the Rotary Rams. This is our home and our family. And so we notice when someone's struggling and we speak up and we say something. We check in with the person, we get them connected to a resource. And if we don't feel comfortable doing that, it's okay. We would want someone else to get them connected. So if I saw a student struggling and I was another student on campus, I would either reach out to them or have an RA or a faculty member or someone else reach out if I didn't feel comfortable. We also have really great laws here that protect against bringing weapons on campus or policies that protect against using substances and having them on our campus. So our laws are really helpful. We also have really great programs to prevent things like bullying or harassment or hazing, things like that. And then involvement. So having students involved in some aspect of campus life has been proven to help their connection to campus and also helps them get connected with people who can recognize when there's a concern. I will have a caveat with this though. Sometimes we have that over-involved student who on paper it looks like everything's going great, right? They're a straight A student, they're involved in all these activities and clubs. But on the inside, they are crumbling and they are sad and depressed, but they don't feel like they can speak up because they don't want to let anyone down. They don't want to seem vulnerable. And so it's okay. This is my statement. It's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to get straight A's and still have mental health issues or still struggle or still have bad days. You can and should reach out for help. And at the end of this podcast, we'll talk about how you can do that. But everyone should be able to reach out for help. But we do know that, having some connection is a protective factor, but it's not 100%, unfortunately. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention your own factors, right? Like your connections with your family and friends, I always tell people it's more important to have at least one or two people that you can call and ask for help. I always say, if your car broke down at 3 o'clock in the morning, who would you call to come get you? Who'd you call to come pick you up? And so if you have those, few people around you that care and they love you and they're there for you no matter what, that's a protective factor. And then on your individual level, it's you. What do you bring to the table? So what are your coping skills like? When things get tough, when things get stressful, how do you respond? Are you, trying to work off that stress by going for a walk, talking with a friend, going to the gym? Are you, abusing substances or holding all that pain in or being isolated? What is your coping technique and how is that helping you improve your mental health and well-being? Mm-hmm. And those are things that we can change while we're here. If we're not doing the things that we need to be doing, we can learn new skills and coping techniques to help better improve our mental health.
Mm. I'm glad that you mentioned how a person can still be excelling in school mm-hmm. and have a lot of social connections and still struggle with mental health and feel isolated. And whether a person is isolated or they just feel isolated, that's why, it's important for people to ask those questions and check in on people. And mm-hmm. that gives the person the permission to share what they're going through and to open up about their struggles, which can be important.
I think one of the most best examples of this was when Simone Biles, who was at her peak as a U.S. gymnast, Olympic gymnast, spoke up and said, no, I am not going to compete because I am not 100% at my mental health and well-being, and I am prioritizing that over the Olympics. And she really helps set the stage for you can be high achieving and you can still struggle, and it is okay to take a step back and it's okay to ask for help. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a lot of information. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, after you question someone and figure out their possible intent, what is the next step that you have for persuasion? Because the framework, QPR, question, persuasion, referral. So now we're going to go into the persuasion aspect. What are some tips and things that you have under the P?
Yeah, so the P is all about just connecting with the person and listening to them, asking them the question, are you thinking about suicide and what's going on with them? And then listening to the problem and just giving it your full attention. Don't judge, don't offer your solutions. You're just really there to listen and then offer hope and eventually reconnect them with a resource. And so the best ways to persuade someone is to offer assistance. Say, would you consider going to counseling services? I'll walk over there with you, or I'll sit here while you make that phone call. Would you consider getting help? I think, from what I've heard you say, I think you would really benefit from speaking with someone. Would you go get help? And I'll go with you. And then if you're not able to do that, you can always ask them to, promise for them not to kill themselves, and say that I'm going to reach out and get some help for you, and let them know that they're not alone. But we're lucky here at the university that we have resources right on campus, and we can have that connection with students. When we're in the everyday world or the working world, and maybe this comes up with like a coworker or a friend, it's a little bit harder to make that persuasion. But here on campus, not only can we persuade them to get help, we can also get help for them, whether they agree or not. And so that's why QPR is so important, is because it's meant to offer hope for people who don't have that hope already.
Yes, thank you for all that information. That is going to wrap up the second part of the QPR series. Please join us for the next episode where we are going to talk about the third and final part, the refer part of QPR, as well as what the suicide spectrum is and suicide intent is. Before we wrap up, a quick reminder that all information shared in today's podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. Thank you for listening to another episode of Roadie Wellness. If you like what you heard today, tune in every Tuesday on all podcast platforms for more. If you want to stay up to date on events and healthcare tips, please follow us at URI Health Promotions on Instagram. And if you have any ideas for future podcast episodes or more social media content that you'd like to see, please feel free to DM us or email us. Until next time, take care and stay healthy.